As Europe faces growing uncertainty in a shifting global landscape, the question of independence from US influence looms larger than ever. With NATO's reliance on American military might and the economic struggles tied to global interdependence, Europe stands at a crossroads. Can it safeguard its defense capabilities and maintain economic stability without relying on Washington? As geopolitical tensions rise, the challenge of diversifying energy resources and seeking new alliances may define Europe's future. Will it achieve true autonomy or remain tethered to its transatlantic partner? I'm Henny Saif. This is Think Tank.
Our world is becoming unhinged.
Welcome back. The National has reported that Europe's global influence is waning due to significant economic and geopolitical challenges. Once a beacon of prosperity, the EU now struggles with technological stagnation, industrial fragmentation, and declining productivity. While the US and China lead in innovation, Europe's failure to keep pace has deepened its vulnerabilities. The bloc's reliance on external suppliers for critical technologies and energy sources, coupled with fragmented policies, has weakened its position in key sectors like defense and clean energy. If Europe hopes to reverse this trend, it must address its structural inefficiencies and strengthen its unity in both industrial and geopolitical strategies to reclaim its global relevance. The New York Times has reported that the potential imposition of tariffs by the Trump administration could exacerbate Europe's economic challenges, already strained by higher energy costs and inflation. US tariffs on European imports, including cars and luxury goods, threaten to reduce exports and dampen investment, potentially cutting growth by 1% in the coming years. Germany and Italy, heavily reliant on US markets, stand to lose billions from these tariff increases, further damaging their fragile economies. Additionally, industries like automotive and pharmaceuticals, critical to Europe's exports, may face significant setbacks. This trade conflict risks prolonging Europe's industrial downturn, forcing European governments into a difficult position as they navigate mounting deficits and the need for economic recovery. As Europe grapples with shifting global power dynamics and America's changing role, the question arises, can Europe stand on its own, or is it destined to remain tied to US support?
The shifting landscape of global power dynamics raises pivotal questions about Europe's capacity for resilience, particularly in defense and energy sectors. With America adopting a more isolationist stance under recent policies, Europe faces an imperative challenge. Can it navigate its own defense needs without relying on US military support? As NATO remains largely dependent on US leadership, Europe's defense infrastructure is still intertwined with American strategies. For example, European powers rely heavily on the US for advanced military technology, intelligence sharing, and strategic deployments across Europe. The war in Ukraine underscores the fragility of Europe's security without US involvement, as highlighted by European leaders like Ukrainian Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal, who warns of Europe's dependence on Ukraine's military prowess as an integral part of its defense strategy. Economically, Europe faces the challenge of diversifying its resources, especially with the ongoing energy crisis exacerbated by its dependence on Russian energy supplies. Efforts to integrate renewable energy sources, such as solar energy in rural Europe, highlight both potential challenges. The continent's economic model hinges on a balance between securing energy independence and maintaining its global competitiveness. The European Union's push for renewable energy integration, while essential for long-term sustainability, faces hurdles in infrastructure and investment. Politically, Europe's pursuit of greater independence could strain its relations with traditional allies. While the idea of reduced dependence on the US is appealing to some, it risks fracturing the unity of the West in the face of common threats, particularly from threatening competitors. While European independence is a plausible goal, the journey toward it will require overcoming significant defense and energy obstacles, navigating complex geopolitical relationships, and addressing internal economic sustainability.
Europe faces mounting geopolitical and economic challenges, so the question of its future global standing becomes more urgent. With rising tensions in transatlantic relations, the EU grapples with internal fragmentation, an over-reliance on external energy sources, and the impact of shifting US foreign policies. As the bloc struggles with economic stagnation, trade disputes, and defense dependence, many wonder, can Europe secure its strategic autonomy and maintain global relevance in the face of these pressures? Today on Think Tank, we're joined by two distinguished experts to discuss these critical issues and more. From Paris, Dr. Majid Boudin, Professor of International Law and Political Analyst, and also joined by Mr. Meher Nicholas, firstly, the Chair of EU ASEAN Center and Director of the Washington Forum on Geoeconomics. Gentlemen, thank you and welcome to Think Tank. Mr. Boudin, we'll start with you. Now, how do you assess the potential for Europe to regain its global influence amidst the challenges posed by US foreign policies and its economic slowdown?
Well, Europe has the capacity. Of course, Europe made several mistakes, especially in determining the speed of catching up in the competitiveness between the EU and the US. The relations between the US and the EU is made by two different components. They are competing and they are opposing each other. But the major opposition is between the US and China. Before, it was the opposition between the US and Russia, the Soviet Union. Mm-hmm. And then it moved to China. But now there is a new component. The competition and for the leadership of the world is regarding the artificial intelligence. And here, it's a major turning point. It's like the invention of electricity, which has changed dramatically the relationship and the geostrategy in the world. Now, this competition, this race, the US want to put everybody beside this struggle with China. But the Europeans, they don't accept that. The Europeans, they want to be part of this race and to take their own share of this, their own. They want to their own position. And here we have the confrontation between the US and Europe. Europe is dependent on the energy and the cheap energy, which was now the relations with Russia are difficult. They have also on the positive side they have a unified currency, and which is a tool, a leverage, and a tool for this competition. But they have taken a lot of they have lost a lot of time in building up a defense and an independent defense from the US, and they were counting on the umbrella of the NATO. When we saw that now the position of the Trump administration, the Trump has shifted this relation in a very dramatic way. Whether this is permanent or whether this is provisional, to put the EU umbrella and to have the leadership and within and to when and then Trump will face China, which is its main target, or whether it's just a provisional situation. When we see how they changed the position of the U.S. administration, how it changed from Biden to Trump, and now Trump is being ambiguous, putting an ambiguity, and this is what we call a strategical ambiguity. How he will support, how its administration will support Ukraine, or whether they will make a deal by excluding Europe, but Europe will not let this happen. And this is the major items of the relationships now.
Yes. Well, Mr. Fazli, now with the challenges that Mr. Boudin has mentioned and the European Union facing more internal fragmentation and growing reliance on the external energy sources, how realistic really is the idea of European strategic autonomy in the sectors of defense and energy?
Well, to make a long story short, it's quite unrealistic for a simple reason, which is money. So today, if we look at the overall annual budget, the Pentagon, the US Department of Defense, America spends roughly $900 billion annually on defense, practically $1 trillion per year. If we look at all the rest of NATO, so what is the rest of NATO? It's maybe 22 or 21 European member states of NATO, including Britain and Turkey. So all of them together, their combined defense budgets annually is like approximately $340 billion per year. So already America today alone spends at least 3 times more on its annual defense budget than all the rest of NATO's members put together. So, of course, when they negotiate, unlike what President Macron and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz said yesterday at the Munich Security Conference, they are not equal at all, because they spend a small fraction. So to make a long story short, when we speak about NATO, the Europeans, they would like to believe that because there are 22 European members of NATO, that they are a majority. Nothing could be further from the truth. NATO is essentially an American alliance with a tiny or small European appendix. And that is a problem. Why is it a problem? Until 3 months ago, if you looked at the dominant ideology, the dominant ideas of policymakers in Paris, London, Berlin, etc., they were very much aligned with America for a simple reason, that Europe has ceased to produce original political ideology for at least 40 or 50 years. So what do we have in Europe? To make a long story short, we have 2 kinds of political party: center-left Social Democrats or New Labour, and center-right conservatives. Both of them, the center-left Labour, Social Democrats, and the center-right conservatives, they have been importing their main political ideas from Washington, D.C. for the past 40 plus years. So they are no longer autonomous if you look at the way they view the world. The problem is with Trump's surprise victory 3 months ago. It was a big shock for Europe because European experts were certain that Biden or Harris would win. So to make a long story short, now there's a big shift in America, because not only has the power been transferred from the Democrats to the Republican Party, but it's a completely different kind of Republican Party. It's a very sort of populist, petit bourgeois, lower middle class, nationalist Republican Party, which has nothing to do with Dick Cheney or George W. Bush. And the Europeans are in shock. Be it more social democrats or centrist, they are in shock and they're having a hard time realizing that America itself has changed fundamentally. And of course, that change in Washington, D.C., it will percolate. It will have a huge impact. Like it or not, the Europeans will be forced to change.
Well, speaking of, pardon, a European change now, Dr. Boudin, in light, pardon, in light of the recent U.S. tariff threats, now you've mentioned they might be real, they might be provisional or a bluff, but how do you think Europe will shift its economic landscape? How are they going to overcome these threats and challenges, particularly regarding its major sectors like automotive and luxury goods?
First of all, we have to remind that Europe is 450 million citizens and consumers and economic players, while the US is 350 or a little bit more. But there is a big difference in favor of the European Union. Of course, the US economy is stronger. And the European economy, the US economy has also a more important deficit. And with the deficit, they are financing the growth of the economy. The European Union did not follow the same path and the same route. So if the European Union is in a need to spend more, they can spend more and they will have the deficit higher, but still sustainable. So in this race, there is no difficulty for Europe. They have a difficulty to catch up, but it's just a matter of catching up the defense sector and the energy sector. And the defense sector, France has the nuclear weapon technology. So they have the coverage of France is covering all the EU. So there is no threats that cannot be stopped because the French umbrella will cover the EU. Regarding the energy, Europe was depending on Russia in a heavy way, but now they are shifting to diversify. And America has its own, it's self-sufficient for in a lot of manners in the energy needs. So in this competition here, we have the technology competition, and it's a fact that the US has a better position with the artificial intelligence. But Europe is coming up. We have seen when ChatGPT has launched its by surprise, and which is a good thing. This new revolution in few weeks, China has surprised also the arena with DeepSeek in few weeks. But France is coming up, Europe is coming up. So there is no, the race is continuing and there are changes. India is coming on the scene and there are changes every day. So we have to follow up the matter. So the matter is not resolved in favor of one or another. But still the competition is there. Now there is the political issue and the intellectual issue and the cultural issue. Europe has its culture for centuries. Now the US has shifted to another political system, the Trump system, a populist system, whether we like it or not, it's a fact. And but it's not new in Europe. This is a reality. Some they say it's new and a surprise. It's not a surprise because there are a lot of political parties like the National Front for National or the AfD in France, or AfD, or the party in Europe or in Italy or in Hungary, the Orban party, etc. This movement, the extreme right or the far right parties are existing, but the fact that they are representing between 15, 20%, sometimes 30% in Europe. What is happening here is that the people like Elon Musk or G.D. Vance, in his speech in Munich this week, he called that these parties must take over and Europe must be aligned to have the same ideology than the Trump administration. But Trump is a very flexible man, is a very pragmatic man. We have to see how things will develop in the next few weeks.
Yes.
But the matter is not resolved.
Well, Mr. Faisley, now, will Europe struggle with the technological stagnation, especially with artificial intelligence and the economic fragmentation, hinder its ability to form new alliances, especially with the US focusing more on Asia?
Yes. So sadly, the short answer is yes. And here I'll have to disagree respectfully with my colleague, Dr. Majid, for a simple reason. What he says may have been true 12, 13 years ago. What do I mean by that? 12, 13 years ago, if you looked at big Western European countries like Italy, France, Germany, England, Britain, the average national income or the GDP per capita was very similar to that of America. When they had roughly similar GDP per person, per capita, you could say what Dr. Majid says, that, the population is slightly bigger in Europe. Today, it's completely not true for a simple reason. GDP per capita today in America is doubled. It's 100% more than the average national wealth in France or Germany or Britain. So that's a big difference. Another big difference is growth. If you look at annual GDP growth in most European countries in the past 5 or 6 years, it has been close to 0 per annum, 0.5%, 1% per annum. In America, it has been close to 3.5% per year. So that's another big difference. But it's not the big thing. There's something much, much bigger. When I was young, I was not an academic or think tank expert. When I was young, I worked for the private sector. And in finance, if you look at the national stock exchange, there's something called market cap. So the market cap is the overall value of a company based on the daily share price fluctuation. And so when I was younger, if you look at the NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchange, if you look at the market cap of American companies, it's 2 times that of the Paris and Frankfurt Stock Exchange. Today, it's 25 times more. That says a lot, and that's really horrible for Europe. Another way of looking at the same issue is something called the MSCI World Index. It's the Morgan Stanley MSCI International Equity Index, which looks at the market cap of all nations. Inside the MSCI World Index, America alone today represents 76% of the world index of listed companies. France, Germany, less than 2%. So clearly, in the past 5, 6 years, they have become much poorer because the price of shares listing on the Frankfurt or Paris or London exchange is a leading indicator. Why is it a leading early indicator? Because it's a reflection of the future wealth. Because financial investors, when they buy a share of Tesla or General Motors or Microsoft, they look at future growth, future earnings. So that's a disaster because, the mirror image that the stock exchange is giving us of the future of Germany, France, Britain is mediocre at best or very bad if you want to be pessimistic. The future image of America's wealth is great. Why is it great? Come back to what you said earlier. Because of the tech sector. Clearly, one state, California, one region, one small region, which is the San Francisco Bay Area, where you have all these gigantic tech companies. They have been at the center of the world economy for a long time. And in the past 4 or 5 years, with AI and other issues, we have witnessed an acceleration of the acceleration itself. So clearly now wealth is being created more than ever at crazy speed in the Silicon Valley, in America, in Texas, Pennsylvania, Boston, New York. It is not, innovation is not happening in France, Germany, and Britain. And that is really very bad for Europe's future. Europe has to wake up, and Europe has to take corrective measures urgently.
Dr. Majid Boudin, the Professor of International Law, and Mr. Meher Nicholas, firstly, Chair of the EU ASEAN Centre. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being with us here on Think Tank. Now, as Europe navigates a rapidly shifting global order, its future hinges on redefining its independence and resilience. Will it rise to the challenge or remain bound by external forces? Questions that will be answered, but unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this episode of Think Tank. I'm Henny Saif. Thank you for watching.